How has your open source team grown over the last year, and what are some of your new areas of focus?
Yeah, we've been growing the team for a little while. This is the third time we've been at OSCON. First time we were here, there were just 2 or 3 of us, desperately trying to run an event this size. Last year we had a good team in place, and this year we've grown it quite a bit more. Most significantly, we now have Peter Ulander, who's joined me to act as the basic general manager for open source, dedicated to running the team. The team got to be big enough that having them all report to me was getting a bit too much. So we've got another level of management and a more dedicated leader for open source. He joined us in February. He's been around for a while. He was at Sun when they open sourced Java, sort of ran part of that program, and was involved in a whole series of things around cloud.com and Apache Cloud Stack. Was involved in that, and some things more around OpenStack recently. And then he was looking for an interesting new challenge and joined the team. So we've added people with specializations in a broader set of areas. So that generally that's what I've been gradually growing the team to cover more. There's so many different specializations, such a broad area in open source that you need lots of different experts to cover it.
Mm-hmm. And available source software licenses have been discussed a lot recently. What's AWS's position on that?
Yeah, we feel that we want to keep open source as open source, and it's fine to have an available source license, a kind of just a proprietary license with some disclosure. And generally, if you're creating a new project, pick a license. The thing you don't want to do is take a license and make it more restrictive. Like if you're going to relicense something, you should make it more permissive, and that generally is what people see that is a good thing to do. And there's a number of places where we've acquired some company or some technology, and we've worked to relicense things to a more permissive license. But if you take an open source project and move it to an available source project, you're actually making it more restrictive. And if you previously contributed something to that project on the assumption that it was, say, Apache license or something, and now it's a proprietary piece of software, you've sort of given your feedback into something that you don't have, the right to use it has been modified by whoever modified that license. So I think that's a move that doesn't feel like it's in the spirit of open source. So we've been sort of pushing back a little bit in those kinds of areas and sort of building our own alternatives to areas where somebody's taken something and built useful functionality, but it's not available to everybody to use. We've done more sort of contributing our own versions of that capability.
Mm-hmm. And can you share some of the more interesting open source projects you're working on right now?
Yeah, well, in the last year, we've released a few things. Probably one of the most interesting ones is Firecracker. It's a micro-virtualization layer, and took a little while for people to figure out exactly what we've done here, but it's basically a very lightweight layer that controls KVM to give you the ability to create a virtual machine in a very, very short period of time, and then to start up a new container or a function for a serverless environment, but with all of the protection you'd have from a virtual machine, whereas containers really don't have the same protection boundary between them when they were running on a machine. So it gives you that. It's some of the core technology we've used in Fargate and AWS Lambda, and we wanted to share it back with the community to build on it. So far, we've had engagements with Containerd, Kata Containers, and more recently, Weaveworks built a system on top that makes it sort of actually behave a bit like Docker, so it becomes a plug-in as a container runtime, but it's a virtual machine runtime. So it's like going round in circles here in terms of the functionality, but we've been really happy to see the pickup of that tool. The other couple of big ones. One was Java with the Corretto launch. We're big users of Java, and there were some changes in the licensing and support model of different versions of Java that were just awkward, and it wasn't what we wanted, so we went, well, we're going to self-support because we're big enough to do that. And then we said, well, we should actually support that for our customers on AWS. And we said, actually, we just need to support it for anybody that wants to use Java on anywhere. So we ended up coming up with a distribution of OpenJDK that has full AWS support for basically all the platforms that you'd be interested in. And it's a free one, because we're doing the work anyway. We just want to have a good base language to run everything on. So that was another case of like the license changes and the support changes becoming more restrictive, and it's just going, no, we need something that's better, that's more helpful to our customers in that area. And then a few more interesting projects. One called CDK. Most people seem to spend most of the time editing YAML files nowadays. And then you said, well, I have this variable here. I have to have some way to have variables that get passed around, and then I need to loop over something. And you said, then you're writing loops in YAML, and it just gets a bit crazy after a while. So when you just use an actual programming language that emits the YAML that does the configuration. So a project called CDK that we open sourced we launched it, I think, maybe 6 months ago, and it just hit its first, we hit a GA release on it and sort of settled it down after in public, sort of, trying things out, getting some feedback from people, and then we sort of settled on the final spec for that. So those are quite broad, different projects, and then one of the main one that we've done most recently is the various contributions to Elasticsearch and the open distro for Elasticsearch.
And is AWS hiring specifically for positions related to open source?
Yeah, we have been for a long time, but it's actually been kind of hard to find them, and we've been trying to get the various teams at AWS to tag their job postings with the word open source with no space in it. Because if you search for open source, you get all the recruiting sourcing people. Unfortunately, it's not, it doesn't kind of work. So, and we've started listing some of them on our website. So as we go through the teams, we're gradually finding there's a lot more that we just sort of don't have a good way to surface. But we're hiring people to work on certainly to work on projects. But what we're really interested in is finding the jobs where part of the job spec is to contribute back to the open source project, and there's a bunch of positions open for things like Kafka and obviously around Kubernetes and lots of different projects where we're hiring more people from the communities to contribute to open source. And in some cases, we're actually hiring the leader of a project or some of the founding members of projects to work at AWS to help lead things. So that applies to the Jupyter Notebook systems, who are one of the leaders of that. And in my team, we hired Kapil, who was the author of Cloud Custodian, the original author of that. So we're working to manage and contribute to some projects, not just with code, but with the overall sort of leadership and steering of some of these projects as well.
Right. And you mentioned the open distro for Elasticsearch project.
Mm-hmm.
How's that going?
It's going very well. It's an interesting situation. We wanted to take the core open source Apache license Elasticsearch distribution, but we wanted to extend it to include security and things like that. Security, SQL querying, some performance monitoring, alerting, and we were developing these for our own Elasticsearch service, which we've had since 2015. But the sort of commercial software from Elastic was sort of commercially licensed, and so we're kind of the open source project really needed security. So that was really what drove this. It's become a baseline thing now. It's very difficult to justify having a product, a service or a project that manages data without having security, a way to encrypt that data. So it was there was a lot of pressure from the community that the open source version really needed to have a security solution. And so after sort of going back and forth, we ended up, we just have to do this. So we released our own add-on Apache licensed open source version of security and a few other features, and then we bundle it together into an easy to use distribution on top of the same upstream version that everyone else uses.
Well, thank you very much for talking with me today.
Okay, thank you.